Hello everyone, this is Vipin Verma from Computer Science and Engineering Department, Sagar Institute of Science and Technology, Gandhinagar, Bhopal. So friends, as we know that there is a kind of medical emergency to be declared in our country, and that initiative taken by the government to keep our citizens to be safe. So we should support our government for this initiative. But don't worry, our SISTec family is always with the students. We are here to help you out through your studies. So in this series, I'm delivering one of the video lecture corresponding to the syllabus which is mentioned in your syllabus, which is mentioned in your university curriculum for the software engineering, subject code CS403. As we know that students, we were already discussed about the 3 units of our syllabus in the classroom teaching or in the classroom lectures. So from now on the daily basis, I'm delivering one of the video lecture corresponding to the 4th and 5th unit. Okay friends, I'm starting with the syllabus defined. Unit number 4, as per your syllabus, these are the topics you can see here in the screen. Mentioned software analysis and testing. So I can say the 4th unit is all about the software analysis, or we can say the analysis of software testing methodologies. It is not about the analysis process, which is the earliest stage of the software development model. The analysis of software testing methodologies. Now, what are the points that we need to discuss here are what is software testing, then what are the different ways to apply software testing methodologies, जैसे कि software static analysis and dynamic analysis, code inspection, software testing, testing fundamentals. So these are the topics which is mentioned in your syllabus. So let's start with the first topic. What is software testing? So as we can see here, the definition of software testing is: it is a process to evaluate the functionality of a software application with an intent to find whether the developed software met the specified requirements or not, and to identify the defects to ensure that the product is defect free in order to produce the quality product. So as you can see here, the definition of software testing that we have already discussed so many times before in the classroom lectures. Software testing is all about the verification of software process and the final product and the validation of final product. Okay, so software testing is a verification or the evaluation process through which we can identifying the errors, or we are trying to identifying or to verify whether the final product would reach all of the business requirements which is mentioned in the requirement documents. So now, static analysis or static testing. So before applying any kind of testing methodology, These testing methodologies are actually dividing into two categories called static analysis or static testing and dynamic analysis, dynamic testing. Now, what is static analysis or static testing? Sometimes it is also known as static testing. So, static testing, as its name implies, it involves no dynamic execution of the software under test and can detect possible defects in an early stage before running the program. That means in the static testing, we are actually trying to verify the code or the documents also that we have generated in the early stages before running the actual code. That means in the static testing, we are not actually running the code to identify the errors. Okay. So in the static analysis is done after coding and before executing the unit test. The main objective of this testing is to improve the quality of software products by finding the errors in the early stages of the development life cycle. So the main objective of testing is to improve the quality of software products. How it will improve this quality of software product? Because we are always trying to identifying the final product should implements all of the user requirements. It won't be skipped. Okay. And then this testing is also called a non-execution technique or the verification. Now, what is verification? Verification is the process to ensure that whether we are building the product right. That means during the development process, we are actually applying some kind of methodologies, some of the metrics, some of the parameters through which we are checking whether we are on the right path or not. That means we are developing the right software product or not. So this is what we call verification. So to verify the requirements which we have and to verify whether we are developing the product accordingly or not. Those what we can say static testing or static analysis is all about the processes to be involved to test the software development process or the product without executing the code. Now, what are the activities to be involved here in the static analysis or in the static testing methodologies? The activities are inspection, reviews, and walkthroughs. Now, what is code review? As its name implies, code review is it is a process which is performed by a person or a persons. We can say that means the group of persons who would review the code to ensure the proper coding standards and conventions are used to construct the program. So that means in this code review method, because we are not executing the actual code, so that means all of the activities are performed, whether it is inspection, review, walkthrough, all of these are performed manually by a single person or the group of persons. So these are the ways through which we are actually performing the static testing method. Now, in the code review, it will be performed by person or persons in which a person is actually reviewing the code to check the conventions or the standards corresponding to a program. Then code review and a code review is done by a peer developer. Now what is the meaning of peer developer? Peer developer is a person or someone who is not involved in the coding method, or you can say who not wrote the code. Okay, so a person who is not involved in the coding phase will actually performing the code review or the code inspection and walkthrough. Then in the code inspection, it is actually a kind of procedure in which error detection techniques for group code reading. So that means in the code inspection method, the number of persons to be required, basically there are three types of peoples to be required here. The first one is moderator, the programmer, and the testing specialist. Then code inspection, the main purpose is to find defects, and a meeting is led by the trained moderator. So it is a kind of meeting in which the person termed as moderator is actually lead in that meeting, and then they all are reviewing that code. So moderator is actually lead that team, and the technical specialist or the testing specialist actually performing the testing, but manually, not executing that code. Okay, so the programmer, those who written that code, will also included in that team. So they are actually trying to inspecting that code. That's why this method is known as code inspection. Obviously, whenever we are not executing that code, what are the methodologies we can follow? We can inspect the code, whether, or we can review the code whether it is having this the standard convention, it follows the standard conventions or not. So this is what we call code review. Through code inspection, we are inspecting the code, but the code inspection must be required more than 2 or 3 people to be involved. Okay, then so the third method is walkthrough. In the walkthrough, again, it is a kind of informal meeting, but it is led by a person who is the author of the code. So a walkthrough is an evaluation process, which is an informal meeting which does not require preparation. The author of the work product explain the product to his team. Participants can ask questions if any. A meeting is led by author. Scrum makes notes of the review and comments. And so as we can see here, in all of the 3 methodologies which is involved in static testing or in the static analysis, in all of the 3 methods, there is one thing is common, which is we are always trying to identifying the errors and the defects. Okay, so and one of a person in all of the 3 methodologies to be fixed to note down these kind of errors. Okay, so in the code inspection team, the moderator is responsible for that, for to notify the errors. In the walkthrough, again, a person is dedicated to notify the errors so that we can perform the error pruning. Similarly, in the code review also. Then, when developers performing the code analysis, or we can say the static testing, what they actually usually looking for, what they are actually trying to looking for. They are trying to review the line of codes. They comment, they check the frequency of the comment. That means how many times the comments to be specified in the code, and what was the frequency of the comments in that code, whether they are specified at the proper place or not. Then the proper nesting, as we know that in the programming we are specifying the nesting of functions and nesting of conditions. So is it proper or not, properly mentioned in the code or not. Then the number of function calls, and at last the cyclomatic complexity of the system. So whenever any one of the kind of method which is mentioned in static testing to be applied in any of the system in the development process, the reviewers or the inspectors trying to identifying these points, or they are looking for these points. Okay, then what are the advantages? You're talking about the advantages of static code. It can be find weakness in the code at the exact location. Obviously, whenever we are performing the static testing, we are reviewing that code, and then at the time of reviewing that code, whenever we have found any kind of error, so we can find the exact location of that error. Okay, and then the next is, and the next advantage of the static code is it can be conducted by trained software assurance developers who fully understand the code. Again, it is the obvious condition. The static software testing must be applied by the professionals, okay, who were trained, and then who is having the skill or the technical skills. They are more technically sound in the software development process. Then the source code can be easily understood by other or future developers. Then it allows a quicker turnaround for fixes. That means whenever we have found any kind of error, and that now we can rectify that error. So weaknesses are found earlier in the development cycle, because before execution of the module or before execution of the product, we are if we have found the errors, we can find the weakness of the software development life cycle, and we can reduce the cost to fix. Okay, then less defects in later test, so it reduces the chances of the errors to be generated at the time of applying the dynamic tests, because we have found so many errors or defects early in the life cycle stage. Then unique defects are detected that cannot hardly to be detected using dynamic test. And just for an example, unreachable code, we can detect the unreachable code because that test can be applied, or the possibility of finding that kind of errors is much more in static analysis or static testing as compared to the dynamic test. The unreachable code, that means those codes which is not accessible during the program execution. So if you are not accessing these kind of code or the code section at the time of dynamic testing, if it is inaccessible, unreachable, that means the system will not found the error in these code sections. So the unreachable code, then variable use, undeclared or unused variables, then uncalled functions and the boundary value violations. So these kind of problems we can identify in the early stage of the development cycle before applying the dynamic testing by the automation tools. Then static code analysis limitations. It is time consuming, obviously. Static testing, whenever we are applying the static testing methodologies, it requires much more time because it was applied manually over the system. Then if we are using automated tools, so in that case also produce false positives and false negatives. Then there are not enough trained personnel to thoroughly conduct static code analysis. So as we have discussed that we required the trained professionals, but it is not always possible to that we have the sufficient number of trained professionals, enough trained professionals, those who can perform these kind of static testing. Then the automated tools can provide a false sense of security that everything is being addressed. Similarly, it does not find vulnerabilities introduced in the runtime environment. Then dynamic analysis or testing. Similarly, the another kind of testing methodology is dynamic analysis and the dynamic testing. Under the dynamic testing, a code is executed. As its name implies, dynamic testing is about the execution of the code. That means whenever we are applying the dynamic testing methodologies, we are executing the code. Then it checks for functional behavior of software system. Basically the dynamic testing methodologies actually performs the methods to check the functional behavior of the system. Then the main objective of this testing is to confirm that the software product works in the conformance with the business requirements. That means the main objective is to check whether the system is actually reaches the business requirement or not. And then this testing is also known as the validation and execution technique, or the validation testing. Similarly, and the verification to be done in static testing. So in the dynamic testing is also known as the validation testing. Now what is validation? Validation is the process whether we are building the right product, that is to validate the product with which we have developed is right or not. That means in the validation methodology, we are actually identifying or checking whether the final product achieves all of the requirements or not. And in the verification, this is the slight difference between the verification and validation. Verification is all about the methods, the process through which we are checking we are on the right path or not, we are achieving our goal or not. And the validation is after the implementation, we are checking where we have achieved that goal or not. Okay. Then dynamic code analysis advantages. What are the various advantages of the dynamic code analysis? It identifies vulnerabilities in a runtime environment. Then it allows for analysis of applications in which we do not have access to the actual code. And then it allows or it identifies again the vulnerabilities that might have been false negatives in the static code analysis. It permits us to validate static code analysis findings. It can be conducted against any application. Okay, then dynamic code analysis limitations. What are the limitations of applying the dynamic code analysis? Automated tools provide a false sense of security that everything is being addressed. Similarly, cannot guarantee the full test coverage of the source code, and the automated tools produce false positives and false negatives similar to the static analysis or the static testing. Now the automated tools are only as good as the rules they are using to scan with, and then it is more difficult to trace the vulnerability back to the exact location in the code, taking longer to fix the problem. So these are the limitations we can say related to the dynamic code analysis. And then there is a possibility of asking a question about the difference between the static and dynamic testing. So as I was already told you so many times in the classroom lectures, wherever we have found any question about the comparison, about the differences between the different methodologies, so we have to specify the comparison or the difference on the basis of points. So always we are trying to write the difference or the comparison on the basis of points. So as we know that in the static testing was done without executing the program, and in the dynamic testing is done by executing the program. So static testing is all about without execution of the program we are testing the code, and in the dynamic testing is done by executing the program. Okay, then we can say from the static testing side, this testing does the verification process. Similarly, if you are talking about the dynamic testing does the validation process. Okay, then static testing is about the prevention of defects, and the dynamic testing is about finding and fixing the defects. Because the static testing we are actually applying during early in the development life cycle, or we can say during the development life cycle stages. So at the time of applying the static analysis or the static testing, we are actually trying to preventing our system with the corresponding defects. Then in the dynamic testing is about finding and fixing the defects. Then static testing gives an assessment of code and documentation. Similarly, dynamic testing gives bugs and bottlenecks in the software system. Then static testing involves a checklist and process to be followed. Similarly, dynamic testing involves test cases for execution. Then this testing can be performed before compilation, and the dynamic testing is performed after the compilation. Then static testing covers the structural and statement coverage testing, and the dynamic testing techniques are boundary value analysis and equivalence partitioning. Boundary value analysis and some of the testing methodologies which is involved in dynamic testing, we discussed it in the later video lectures. In detail. Then cost of finding defects and fixing is less in static testing. Then in the dynamic testing is all about the boundary value analysis. Then the cost of finding defects and fixing is less in the static testing, and cost of finding and fixing defects is high in the dynamic testing. Then return on investment will be high as this process involved at an early stage. Similarly, return on investment will be low as this process involves after the development phase. Then more reviews and comments are highly recommended for good quality. More defects are highly recommended for good quality. Then requires loads of meetings, comparatively requires lesser meetings. So these are the points. On the basis of that we can compare or we can differentiate both of these methodologies or the testing schemes, or the categories of testing methodologies called static and dynamic testing. So friends, this is all about this video lecture. Thank you.